People like you don't belong here, the head nurse spat, towering over Joseph, who was frozen by the VIP suite window. Her voice, sharp and venomous, carried years of disdain for those she considered unworthy of this hospital's privileged space. She jabbed a finger toward the glass, making it clear to everyone nearby that the line had been crossed. That man inside is worth billions, she sneered. Thomas is the most crucial patient we've ever had. You, some janitor's son, have no right to stand here, staring at him like some circus attraction. Before Joseph could react, she snatched the frayed notebook from his hands and threw it down the polished hallway with such force that it slammed against the wall. Pages scattered across the floor, drifting like leaves caught in a storm. Inside the suite, chaos was unfolding. Whitfield's body jerked violently, his once pink skin now a lifeless gray, his lips turning a sickening blue. The heart monitor screamed in erratic patterns, a language of distress no one in the room could decipher. 15 of the hospital's top doctors stood huddled around his bed, their faces stricken with fear. The fear that comes when skill meets its limits, and a life slips through the cracks. Despite every possible intervention, they were helpless. No one knew what was slowly taking this pharmaceutical magnate's life. But outside the room, the one person who might have had the answer had just been dismissed. Joseph, discarded like garbage? Just hours earlier, the scene at the hospital had been a stark contrast to the damp basement where Joseph spent his time. On the 12th floor, the annual Christmas Eve gala was in full swing. Guests, dressed in the finest designer clothes, sipped champagne worth more than a month's rent, laughing under crystal chandeliers. Fixtures likely worth more than an entire house. Meanwhile, 12 floors below, Joseph sat alone in the hospital's basement, the air heavy with the stale scent of mold and old coffee. The space felt like a different world entirely. On the grand stage above, Whitfield was the star. Dressed in a $12,000 Tom Ford suit, he commanded the room as though he were the center of everything. His PC Philippe watches, worth $250,000, caught the light as he lifted his glass of Macallan, a drink worth $800 per shot. His rehearsed speech rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Novartis Biosystems is proud to commit $12 million to pediatric cancer research, he declared, pausing just long enough for the applause he had orchestrated. His smile, designed for the cameras, radiated wealth and generosity. But below, in the forgotten basement, Joseph was a silent observer, unseen in a world that couldn't care less about him. Thomas's smile stretched wide, radiating the type of benevolence that could win over a crowd. At Novartis, we believe every child deserves a fighting chance at life, he declared, his voice smooth and rehearsed. The room erupted in applause, a sound so thunderous it almost seemed scripted. Thomas soaked it all in, basking in the satisfaction of a performance well done. But what no one in that room, nor the cameras, could see was the dark truth that had unfolded earlier that afternoon. Just hours before, Thomas had coldly killed research into 3 rare diseases. The patient populations were too small, the market too limited. The returns didn't justify the cost. It was nothing personal, just business. By 10:40 p.m., something in Thomas's stomach began to shift, a flutter he couldn't ignore. Nausea crept up his throat, souring the taste of his champagne. He brushed it off with a casual comment to his assistant, laughing it off as stress and too much rich food. Meanwhile, 12 floors below, Joseph snapped his medical textbook shut with sudden force. His father, Christopher, looked up from the security monitors, sensing the shift. "Dad." Joseph's voice was quiet, careful, the tone he used when he was processing something important. "There's a smell coming through the ventilation system. Something's wrong." Christopher, eyeing the security feeds, furrowed his brow. "What do you mean, a smell, Ben?" "It's coming from the elevator shaft down through the vents," Joseph explained, his hands trembling. "It's a chemical smell, the same one from the lab where Mom worked before she got sick." "Someone upstairs is really sick, Dad. Seriously sick." Christopher paused, his mind racing. "Ben, you can't possibly smell something from that far up." Joseph didn't look up from the worn notebook in his lap, his gaze fixed on page 2003. "I can smell it clearly," he interrupted, his voice steady. "The ventilation carries every scent. It's metabolic acidosis. A sweet smell, but wrong, like fruit rotting from the inside. Christopher, though skeptical, had learned to trust his son's instincts. Over the years, he'd seen Joseph's extraordinary senses in action. Joseph had difficulty with everyday tasks, like tying his shoes or making eye contact, but when it came to perception, he was unlike anyone else. It's probably nothing serious, Christopher said, but even as he spoke, a nagging feeling in his gut told him otherwise. By 11:15 p.m., the mild discomfort Thomas had felt earlier escalated into excruciating pain. His abdomen burned as if something inside him were tearing apart. He tried to breathe through it, but nothing helped. By 11:40 p.m., he was on a gurney, whisked down the hospital's corridors toward the most expensive VIP suite, surrounded by frantic staff who were doing their best to hide their panic. In the basement, Joseph's head jerked up. His gaze locked on security monitor 12, which showed the 12th floor in fuzzy black and white. Doctors were pouring into a room in a chaotic rush, their frantic movements clear even in the grainy footage. "That's him," Joseph whispered with chilling certainty. "That's the person I've been smelling." Christopher, already on his feet, asked, "Who are you talking about?" Joseph's eyes didn't leave the screen. "The one upstairs," he said quietly, his voice steady, knowing. "The person I've been smelling, the one with the metabolic acidosis." Joseph's voice cracked with a sudden, painful realization. "Dad, he's following the same pattern. Exactly the same progression." The room grew still, the weight of the words sinking in. Christopher's gaze sharpened. "What pattern, Ben? What are you seeing?" "It's Mom's pattern," Joseph said, his voice steady but carrying the depth of 3 years of quiet grief. "He's dying the same way she did." A cold silence swept through the room as the memories resurfaced. 3 years ago, on September 22nd, Sarah Turner had been rushed to the 8th floor of this very hospital. She had come in 4 times in just 2 weeks, each visit marked by the same relentless symptoms: sharp abdominal pain, nausea that wouldn't relent, and a weakness so severe she collapsed while working a janitorial shift in one of the research labs. Each time, the doctors dismissed her, offering diagnoses that explained nothing: gastritis, irritable bowel syndrome, anxiety. One doctor, Christopher, would never forget his condescending tone, even wrote drug-seeking behavior in her chart, implying she was faking the pain for prescriptions. Sarah's death had come after 18 hours of relentless agony, all the while doctors insisted it was psychosomatic, that her suffering was imagined. When the autopsy results came weeks later, the truth was revealed: acute intermittent porphyria, a rare disorder, one so uncommon that only 1 in 100,000 would ever develop it. A disease so rare that most doctors would never see a single case in their career. If only someone had known what to look for. If only they'd conducted a simple $50 test or just listened to her complaints instead of writing her off as hysterical. Christopher's mind still replayed that final night with unbearable clarity. Sarah had been holding Joseph's tiny hand, her voice a faint whisper as she told him, "I love you most, baby, more than anything in this world." Then the seizures came, the violent convulsions that the doctors dismissed as attention-seeking behavior. Joseph had been only 10 years old. He never cried at the funeral, never shed a tear since. Instead, he buried himself in books, reading every medical journal and textbook he could get his hands on, scraps from hospital dumpsters, case studies tossed aside. "I could have saved her," Joseph would whisper to himself in the dark at 3 a.m. when the tears would finally come. "If I had known what I know now, I could have saved Mom." Now, at 13, Joseph sat before his father, still in the same hoodie he'd worn for days, unable to look anyone in the eye. The world saw him as broken, as damaged, someone to be pitied or ignored. But those eyes that never met anyone's gaze saw everything that others couldn't. "I have to go up there, Dad," Joseph said suddenly, his voice urgent, his determination clear. "That man's going to die, exactly like Mom did, and they don't know what's wrong. But I do. I know what's happening to him." Christopher hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Ben, you can't just walk in." "He's going to die, and they won't know how to stop it," Joseph interrupted, gripping his notebook tightly. "But I have proof. Right here in my notebook. The case study they threw away years ago? The research from Navarres that could have saved Mom if anyone had paid attention. Christopher felt his throat tighten, the weight of his son's words crashing into him. If they could save this man, this wealthy, powerful man, maybe it would give meaning to Sarah's death. Maybe her suffering would save someone else. Okay, Christopher said, a decision settling into his chest. Let's go save a life. They bolted for the elevator, the urgency in their every step. Christopher's security badge only granted access up to the 11th floor, but he swiped it anyway, hoping against hope it would work. The elevator crawled upwards with agonizing slowness, each floor marker flashing by like a countdown. Each number, 7, 8, 9, was a reminder of the time slipping away, the seconds Joseph couldn't afford to lose. His breathing came too fast, shallow gasps that only made his head spin. The fluorescent lights overhead were harsh, burning into his sensitive eyes. His fingers tapped a rapid, rhythmic pattern against his leg, a way to manage the overwhelming flood of sensory input. Finally, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, an almost absurdly cheerful sound in the tense silence. And there, standing in front of them like an immovable wall of authority, was a doctor, a man Joseph instantly recognized. Dr. Charles, the same man who had written drug-seeking behavior in his mother's chart. The man who had dismissed her, who had let her die because he was too proud to admit he might be wrong. Hayes's eyes narrowed at Christopher's security uniform, his gaze dripping with thinly veiled contempt. He had the kind of arrogance that came from believing some people were simply worth more than others. "You work in the basement, don't you, Turner?" he sneered. "What exactly are you doing on the VIP floor?" Joseph's grip tightened on his father's hand, his voice barely a whisper. "They won't believe me, Dad. They never believe people like me. But I have proof. The memo that shows what really killed Mom." Hayes stood unmoving, blocking their way with an air of untouchable authority. "I asked you a question, Turner. What are you doing on this floor?" Christopher's security badge told the story in an instant. Night shift officer, basement employee, someone who didn't belong where the wealthy received care. The kind of man Hayes likely looked down on without even thinking. "There's a medical emergency," Christopher said, his voice steady despite the tension. "My son knows exactly what's wrong with your patient." Hayes's smile was cold, like ice. "The one who dropped out of middle school because he couldn't function in a normal classroom? That son?" His eyes flicked over Joseph briefly, dismissing him as though he were nothing more than a nuisance. "Mr. Turner, I have 30 years of experience. I went to Johns Hopkins, did my residency at Mass General. Are you seriously trying to tell me that your 13-year-old dropout son knows something I don't?" Each word from Hayes landed like a slap, designed to remind them of their place in the hospital's rigid hierarchy. Joseph's hands were shaking now, the lights overhead growing unbearably bright, as if they were closing in on him. Christopher recognized the signs. His son was on the verge of shutting down. In less than 2 minutes, he would retreat inward, a shell where no one could reach him. "Please, Dr. Hayes," Christopher said, his voice barely above a plea. "Just let him look at the patient, for 1 minute." "Absolutely not," Hayes shot back, his voice firm. "We don't allow children with special needs to wander into critical care situations where they might interfere with actual medical treatment." Through the gap beside Hayes's rigid form, Christopher glimpsed into the VIP suite. Thomas was convulsing violently on the bed, his body arching in ways that seemed unnatural, despite the restraints holding him down. The machines around him screamed in chaos, each alarm a chorus of impending death. 14 doctors surrounded the bed, their voices rising in a frantic blend of confusion and desperation. "Lipase levels are normal. This isn't pancreatitis," one of them shouted. The medical team was scrambling, throwing out every possibility. "CT scan shows no signs of aortic dissection," one of the doctors said, frustration seeping into his voice. "Could this be some kind of toxin exposure?" But when the toxicology report came back clean, the room fell into disarray, everyone grasping at concepts they didn't fully understand. The problem remained elusive, invisible to their trained eyes. Joseph, however, stood completely still, his eyes locked on Thomas as if he could see beyond the chaos. His lips moved softly, counting something that no one else could hear. "I've seen this progression before," Joseph murmured, barely audible over the noise. Hayes snapped his attention toward him, his gaze sharp. "Seen what exactly?" "The way his body's moving," Joseph said, his tone calm but certain. "That's not just regular pain, it's visceral neuropathic pain." He pointed at the catheter bag next to the bed. "Look at his urine. It's a port wine color. That's not blood contamination. That's porphobilinogen accumulation." Hayes froze, his eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" "Acute intermittent porphyria," Joseph declared, his voice unwavering. "And you're giving him barbiturates. I can see the IV bag. It's phenobarbital. Barbiturates are one of the main triggers for porphyria. Every dose you give him is making it worse." The room went still. A silence that weighed heavy and suffocating settled over them. "Porphyria occurs in 1 in 100,000. Hayes started, but his voice was tinged with doubt for the first time. "The odds of encountering it are—" "My mom had it," Joseph interrupted, his voice flat, the words falling from him like a hammer. "She died here, on the 8th floor, 3 years ago, September 22nd. You were her doctor, Dr. Hayes. You wrote drug-seeking behavior in her chart. You told her the pain was all in her head. You sent her home 4 times while she was dying." Joseph's words cut through the tension, unwavering. 18 hours after you sent her home the last time, she died in our bathroom." Hayes's face drained of color, the past rushing back in waves, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. "I see hundreds of patients every month," Hayes muttered, his voice shaky. "I can't remember every case." "Sarah Turner," Joseph continued relentlessly, his gaze never leaving Hayes. "Employee number 4126, janitor on the research wing. She was 35 when she died." Joseph pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. The document was old, the text faded from countless copies, but the Novartis Biosystems logo was still visible. The date on it was March 15, 2017. Christopher had never seen it before, and his breath caught in his throat when he looked at it. "What is that?" Hayes demanded, his voice now fraying at the edges. "It's an internal memorandum from Novartis Biosystems," Joseph said, unfolding the paper with painstaking care. "They were going to develop enzyme replacement therapy for acute intermittent porphyria. The project had an $8.5 million budget over 5 years. It could have saved 2,000 lives and taught doctors how to recognize and treat this disease." Joseph pointed to the signature at the bottom of the page. "But the project was terminated. The market was too small. The ROI was negative. And the signature, Thomas, CEO." Joseph's voice cracked, the emotion breaking through. "He killed the research that could have saved my mom. He buried it because it wasn't profitable enough." Hayes stood frozen, unable to respond, while Christopher felt his chest tighten with a heavy, suffocating realization. "Ben, where did you find this?" Christopher finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "From the trash on the 3rd floor, 8 years ago," Joseph answered, his tone completely matter-of-fact, as if this had all been inevitable. "After the board meeting, someone threw away all the project files," Joseph said, voice steady. "I kept them, all 12 projects. 12 different rare diseases, all of them abandoned for profit." A loud, frantic shout cut through their conversation. "He's crashing! Heart rate dropping below 40. Get the crash cart in here!" The alarm screamed, each blare a warning of life slipping away. Hayes looked from the memo in his hands to the man on the bed, then to the boy standing before him. Joseph, the one he had just dismissed as irrelevant. "If you're wrong about this diagnosis," Hayes began, his voice still thick with skepticism. "I'm not wrong," Joseph interjected firmly, his tone unyielding. "I've studied this disease for 3 years. I know every symptom, every test, every treatment protocol. I know it better than anyone in that room because they've forgotten it. They read about it once in med school and never thought about it again. I learned it by watching my mother suffer while you told her it was all in her head." The machines shrieked now, the sound of life slipping away. Hayes closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. Then he made a choice, a decision that could save a life. "You've got 2 minutes," Hayes said, voice tight. "If you're wasting our time, I'll stop you right here." Joseph didn't hesitate. Without a word, he moved forward. He stopped in front of the window, pressed both hands against the glass, his reflection showing determination that seemed beyond his years. "I need a woods lamp. UV light, 365 nanometers," he instructed, voice sharp and precise. "Run a Watson-Schwartz test on his urine right now. 2 milliliters of urine, 2 milliliters of Elix reagent. If it turns cherry red, that's the diagnosis. Do it." Hayes looked at him again, seeing something he hadn't noticed before. Then, without another word, he opened the door to the suite. As Joseph stepped inside, the room went eerily silent. 15 doctors, each a specialist in their field, turned to face him, their skepticism thick in the air. The only sound came from the blaring alarms and Thomas's labored breathing. Joseph, just 13 years old and dressed in a worn hoodie, clutched his notebook tightly. Christopher stood just behind him, protective but silent. Dr. Sarah broke the silence, her voice dripping with authority. "Who authorized them to be here?" Hayes, once hesitant, now spoke with renewed conviction. "The boy knows the diagnosis. We couldn't figure it out." "He can." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the room, thick with disbelief. Dr. Matthew didn't even try to hide his disdain. "We've got 15 physicians here with over 200 years of experience, and you're telling me a middle school dropout has solved this?" Ignoring the murmurings, Joseph moved toward Whitfield's bedside. His gaze never wavered, locked on the man's deteriorating condition. Whitfield's skin was an ashen gray, his lips tinged purple, and his body writhed in the restraints. The heart monitor's chaotic beeps were deafening, one moment dropping to 40 beats per minute, then spiking to 190 as though it were fighting against the inevitable. "Don't touch him!" Dr. Miller barked, furious. Joseph didn't touch the patient. His eyes methodically scanned Whitfield's condition. His face, his hands, the IV lines, the catheter bag. "Port wine-colored urine," he stated, clinical and detached. "Approximately 400 melanol, that's not blood contamination." "We already checked for blood in the urine," a young resident argued. "You checked for red blood cells," Joseph corrected sharply. "What I'm talking about is porphobilinogen. That requires a different test altogether." Joseph's gaze fixed on Whitfield's hands, sharp and focused. "Look at the left one," he said, pointing. "Notice the contrast?" The fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow on the exposed skin, revealing a stark difference in pigmentation. "That's not normal." Several doctors leaned in, eyes narrowing. One of them nodded slowly, acknowledging the visible discrepancy. "We're seeing photosensitivity," Joseph continued. "The darker skin is a result of abnormal purine accumulation." The team exchanged looks. Cooper furrowed his brow. "But the MRI showed no abnormalities in the brain," he objected, his voice tinged with confusion. Joseph cut him off with quiet certainty. "This isn't a brain disorder. The issue lies with the peripheral nervous system. Nerve damage that starts outside the brain, spreading through the body." The tension in the room thickened as the implications of Joseph's words set in. "This isn't your standard epilepsy either," Joseph went on, his tone calm but insistent. "This pattern of seizures is entirely different. It's peripheral neuropathy, not grand mal epilepsy. Treating this with anti-epileptic drugs is like trying to fix a broken leg with a Band-Aid. It's the wrong approach." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Hayes, who had been quietly processing, finally spoke. "So what are we dealing with here?" His question hung in the air, almost a whisper, but Joseph's response cut through the room like a blade. "Acute intermittent porphyria," Joseph declared with unwavering confidence. The words felt like a heavy weight, sinking in deep. The shock was palpable. Miller's voice broke the stillness. "That condition only affects one in every 100,000 people. Hospitals like ours see it once, maybe twice a decade." "Then explain why you've missed it," Joseph challenged, flipping open his notebook. The pages were filled with careful, meticulous notes, complex diagrams, and a clear, undeniable pattern. "And even worse," he continued, "you've been treating this patient with medications that are making everything worse." His finger jabbed at the IV pole, the hanging bags of phenobarbital and morphine swaying slightly. "These drugs are triggering a cascade effect, exacerbating his condition every minute." Cooper blinked in disbelief. "How do you know our exact medication regimen?" he demanded. Joseph didn't flinch. "I can read the labels from here, and I can see it in the deterioration. He crashed right after you started the barbiturate infusion. The timeline's clear." Hayes, who had been absorbed in the medical chart, went pale as he checked. "He's right. The patient's collapse happened exactly when the phenobarbital was administered." The tension was thick, but Miller broke it, asking quietly, "What do we do now?" Joseph's response was immediate. "Stop the barbiturates, stop the morphine, and start administering hemin intravenously, 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. It's the only thing that can reverse this cascade." Cooper shook his head. "We don't stock hemin here." Joseph's response was swift and unwavering. "You're a research hospital with an active transplant unit. You have it in your pharmacy. Check for penhemidin." The confusion deepened as Hayes scrambled for answers, calling the pharmacy. "This is Dr. Hayes. Do we have penhemidin in stock? Check it now." The answer came quickly, and Hayes was visibly stunned. 6 vials, he said in disbelief. "Prepare 1 vial for immediate infusion," Joseph instructed, "but make sure the diagnosis is confirmed first. I need a Woods lamp." A chorus of confused murmurs filled the room. "A UV lamp, 365 nanometers," Joseph clarified, his eyes never leaving his patient. Christopher, a nearby resident, immediately pulled a flashlight from his belt, the kind used for detecting biological evidence at crime scenes. Joseph took it carefully, moving toward the urine collection bag. Someone dimmed the lights, and the room fell into darkness. Only the faint hum of machines provided any illumination. As Joseph switched on the UV flashlight, the urine inside the bag erupted into a glowing, fluorescent pink. It shimmered in the dark like radioactive material, unmistakable under the ultraviolet light. The room went completely still. Everyone watched as the color change confirmed what they had feared. The diagnosis was clear. The fight to save Whitfield's life was just beginning. The room fell into stunned silence as the UV light revealed the unmistakable fluorescence in Whitfield's urine. Joseph's voice cut through the tension, calm but firm. "Perfibolinogen fluorescence. Under ultraviolet light, it's definitive for porphyria. This is the proof we've been searching for." The doctor stood motionless, the glow from the bag a stark contrast to the harsh overhead lights now illuminating the room. The answer had been right there, hidden in plain sight, yet it had eluded them entirely. Hayes, his voice subdued, offered a soft correction. "We still need Watson-Schwartz confirmation." Joseph, unfazed, recited the next steps. 2 milliliters of urine with 2 milliliters of Ehrlich's reagent. It'll turn cherry red if positive. But his eyes stayed fixed on the monitor where Whitfield's condition was deteriorating in real time. "We don't have time for that," Joseph said, his voice steady but urgent. "Look at the heart rate, it's crashing." The numbers on the screen dropped rapidly. 120, 100, 80, 70, 60, 50, 42. Each drop marked another tick closer to death. The frantic beeping of the heart monitor filled the room like a countdown. "He's coding!" Miller shouted, panic rising in her voice. Joseph didn't hesitate. "Start the hemin infusion now," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "If you don't stop the porphyrin cascade, he'll arrest again within minutes. We can't wait." Hayes didn't question. In that moment, he made the call. "Get the penhemidin. 313 millikia IV push, now." A voice protested, "But we don't have a confirmed diagnosis yet." "Do it now!" Hayes's command was sharp, cutting through the doubt. "Hang the hemin, or this man dies in less than 60 seconds. Nurses moved quickly, their practiced efficiency taking over. One of them sprinted out of the room, returning 90 seconds later with the vial, a dark amber liquid worth $10,000. They mixed it with saline, hung the IV bag, and began the infusion. The room held its collective breath, watching for any sign of change. 30 seconds, then 40, then 50. Whitfield's heart rate began to climb, slowly at first. 65, 75, 85, 90. The numbers steadied, the frantic beeping of the heart monitor finally slowing into something almost normal. His breathing, once shallow and labored, began to ease, each breath coming more smoothly. The seizures, once violent, gradually tapered off until they stopped completely. The tension in the room began to melt away, replaced by cautious hope. The color returned to Whitfield's skin, from ashen gray to a faint, healthy pink. Miller checked his pupils with her penlight. They were reactive, equal, signs that he was stabilizing. The room exhaled as one, the weight of the last few minutes lifting. Hayes turned to Joseph, still standing by the bed. His hands trembled from the adrenaline that hadn't yet worn off. "How did you know all of this?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Joseph closed his notebook, his hands shaking as the emotional toll began to hit. 3 years ago, I watched my mother die from this same disease, in this same hospital. Same symptoms. Same machines. The beeping of her life slipping away. I promised myself, at her funeral, that I'd never let this happen to anyone else if I could help it. He looked down at Whitfield, whose unconscious face seemed to hold so many untold stories. Even someone like him, Joseph murmured, almost to himself, gets to live when my mother didn't. 40 minutes later, Thomas's eyelids fluttered open. He blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, disoriented and confused, like someone waking from a nightmare they couldn't remember. A nurse leaned over him gently. "Mr. Whitfield, can you hear me? You're at Sterling Heights Medical Institute. You experienced a severe medical emergency, but you're stable now." Whitfield's voice was hoarse, his words fragmented. "What happened to me?" Dr. Hayes stepped forward. "You had an acute attack of intermittent porphyria, a rare genetic disorder. About 1 in 100,000 people have it." Whitfield's eyes widened in confusion. The mystery of what had happened to him was only just beginning to unfold. Whitfield's gaze swept the room, sizing up the 15 top-tier doctors, his own personal dream team, the very best money could buy. But then his attention shifted. He froze. In the corner stood an unexpected pair, a teenage boy in a hoodie and a man in a security guard uniform. Who are they, and what are they doing here? Whitfield's voice was thick with confusion. Hayes hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That's Joseph and his father, Christopher. Christopher works the night shift security here." Whitfield's frown deepened. "I'm paying for the best. Why are they in my room?" A heavy silence hung in the air before Hayes answered. "Joseph is the one who figured out what was wrong with you when none of us could. He diagnosed your condition when we were all stumped." Whitfield's face twisted into disbelief. "A child? He's 13, a 7th grade dropout, and he taught himself medicine by rummaging through discarded textbooks and journals in this hospital." Hayes's voice softened, a touch of awe creeping in. "He saved your life, Mr. Whitfield. You're still here because of him." The anger crept up on Whitfield. "You're telling me a kid without a formal education saved me?" "Yes," Hayes confirmed, then handed Whitfield a folded document. "He wanted you to see this." Whitfield's hands trembled as he opened it. As he read, his complexion paled. The letterhead, Novarus Bios. Date, March 15th, 2017. The proposal for porphyria research, $8.5 million over 5 years to save 2,000 lives. His own signature sealed its fate. Project terminated. Market too small. ROI negative. The paper shook in his hands. "Where did you find this?" From across the room, Joseph spoke, his tone measured. "I found it in a trash bin on the 3rd floor research wing 8 years ago. After a board meeting, someone threw away the canceled proposals. I collected them." Whitfield's eyes narrowed, seeing Joseph for the first time. "You've kept this all this time?" "Yes, sir." Joseph nodded, his expression impassive. "Along with 11 other memos. 12 rare disease research projects scrapped between 2016 and 2020 because the patients were too few to make a profit." Whitfield's throat tightened. "It's just business. We can't fund everything that comes our way." Joseph's voice was cold as he interrupted. "My mother died of porphyria 3 years ago, right here in this hospital on this very floor. She came to the ER 4 times in 2 weeks with worsening symptoms. Nobody knew what was happening. No one ran the right tests. She died, screaming in pain. The room went still, the weight of Joseph's words settling in. The autopsy confirmed it weeks later. Acute intermittent porphyria, the exact disease you survived. If your company hadn't killed that research, doctors might have known what to look for. Maybe medical schools would have taught more than a single paragraph about it. Maybe my mom would still be alive. Whitfield felt a sharp pain in his chest, the air leaving his lungs. I didn't mean to kill anyone. Joseph's response was direct, without emotion. You didn't mean to kill her, but you chose to prioritize profits over people. 12 projects, 12 diseases. How many lives did you dismiss because they didn't generate enough revenue? Hayes stepped forward, adding context. Joseph's tracked 216 misdiagnoses of rare diseases at this hospital alone, 58 different conditions. 91% of these patients were initially misdiagnosed because doctors weren't trained properly. They weren't trained because the pharmaceutical industry doesn't fund the research. Because patients like Sarah Turner, my mother, weren't seen as worth the investment. Whitfield stared at the memo, at the signature he had made, at the cold decisions he'd signed off on. Somewhere, a woman had died because of it, and despite every reason to walk away, her son had saved his life. Why? Whitfield's voice cracked, the weight of his guilt suffocating him. Whitfield's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the 15 doctors, the elite specialists who represented the pinnacle of medical care his wealth could afford. But then something unexpected caught his attention. A teenage boy stood in the corner wearing a faded hoodie next to a man in a security guard uniform. Who are they? Whitfield's voice sharpened, disbelief creeping in. And why are they in my room? Hayes hesitated, taking a moment to gather his words. That's Joseph and his father, Christopher. Christopher works security here on the night shift. Whitfield's confusion deepened. I've hired the best doctors money can buy. What are they doing in my private room? The room fell into an uneasy silence before Hayes spoke again. Joseph's the one who figured out what was happening to you. He diagnosed your condition when none of us could. Whitfield's face twisted in disbelief. A child? You're telling me a kid, who dropped out of 7th grade, figured out what was killing me? Hayes nodded. He taught himself medicine, learned from discarded medical journals and textbooks from this hospital. He saved your life when even the best doctors in this region couldn't. Whitfield's frustration flared. A middle school dropout? You're telling me he saved my life? Yes, Hayes said simply, handing Whitfield a folded piece of paper. He wanted you to see this. Whitfield opened it, his fingers trembling as he read the words. His face drained of color as the realization hit him. The document had Novartis Bios's letterhead, dated March 15, 2017. The proposal for research into porphyria. $8.5 million to study a rare disease, a proposal that could save thousands. His own signature was at the bottom. Project terminated, market too small, ROI insufficient. His grip tightened on the paper. Where did you find this? Joseph's voice, soft yet clear, broke the silence. I found it in a trash bin on the 3rd floor research wing after a board meeting. They threw out all the files for canceled projects. I collected them. Whitfield's gaze locked onto Joseph. You kept this all these years? Yes, Joseph said with quiet certainty. Along with 11 other memos. 12 rare disease research proposals that were scrapped because the patient populations were too small to be profitable. Whitfield felt his throat tighten, the weight of the truth pressing in. That's just business. We can't fund every research project that comes across our desk. Joseph's response was blunt. My mother died of porphyria 3 years ago in this very hospital. She came to the ER 4 times in 2 weeks with worsening symptoms, but no one knew what was wrong. No one did the right tests. She died in agony. The words hung in the air like a suffocating cloud. The autopsy confirmed it weeks later. Acute intermittent porphyria, the exact disease you almost died from tonight. If your company hadn't canceled the research, maybe doctors would have been trained to recognize it. Maybe my mother would have been saved. Whitfield's breath caught in his chest, the air draining from his lungs as the enormity of what he had done sank in. I didn't mean to cause anyone's death. Joseph's voice was flat, unemotional. You didn't mean to kill her, no. But you chose profit over saving lives. You decided which diseases mattered based on how much money they could make. 12 projects, 12 diseases. How many people died because they weren't profitable enough for you to care? Hayes stepped in, his voice firm. Joseph's tracked 216 misdiagnoses of rare diseases at this hospital alone. 58 different conditions. 91% of those cases were misdiagnosed because doctors weren't trained. Why weren't they trained? Because companies like yours don't fund research for diseases with small patient populations. Because patients like Sarah Turner, my mother, don't make the company enough money to matter. Whitfield's eyes lingered on the memo, his signature, the decision that had cost a woman her life. And yet, the boy who had every reason to hate him had saved him. Why? Whitfield's voice cracked with emotion. Why did you save me? He needs to be integrated into this hospital, and fast. What do you think? Dr. Brooks's voice was confident, but her eyes searched the room for support. Hayes didn't hide his skepticism. What are we talking about here? A rare disease consult service? With Joseph leading the charge? Brooks didn't hesitate. Yes, a 13-year-old who diagnosed a condition none of us could. He deserves more than just a seat at the table. He deserves to lead. Hayes frowned. He's only 13. No degree, no formal qualifications. Brooks met his gaze, unshaken. A 13-year-old boy with a notebook full of discarded research saved a billionaire's life tonight. Maybe our standards for what makes someone qualified need a second look. She turned to Joseph, her voice softening. You wouldn't be here as a sideshow or token gesture. You'd work beside us, a true colleague. We'd handle the legal side of things. You bring what we clearly lack. Diagnostic insight and pattern recognition. This could be a real partnership. Joseph's eyes widened, his hands twitching with nerves. I don't think I can... You already have, Miller interrupted, her tone calm. You identified a rare disease in minutes when we were completely lost. You predicted the complications before the lab even gave us the results. You know more about these diseases than some specialists who've spent their entire careers studying them. Cooper nodded in agreement. You've spent years studying diseases we've long since forgotten about. You have a gift for pattern recognition that's beyond what any textbook can teach. You saved a life tonight, and that matters more than any diploma. Joseph turned to his father, seeking guidance. Christopher placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his expression soft but proud. Your mom would be so proud of you, Ben, he said quietly. She'd want you to help people. Make sure no one else is forgotten the way she was. Joseph nodded slowly, the weight of what he was being asked to do settling on his shoulders. Okay, he said after a long pause. But I need something in return. Name it, Whitfield said without hesitation. Anything. I want complete access to all your company's discarded research files, Joseph said, his voice steady. Every project that was canceled, every drug that was abandoned. I want it all. Whitfield's throat tightened. That's a long list. I know exactly how long it is, Joseph replied. I want to see the patterns in what gets discarded, the diseases that don't get studied because they're seen as too small to matter. I want to make sure those mistakes don't happen again. Whitfield nodded after a moment, his decision clear. You'll have full, unrestricted access. Joseph reached for his worn notebook. Then I want to turn this into something bigger. I want to create a national database of rare diseases. Every case, every misdiagnosis, every missed opportunity. Let patients submit their stories, let doctors search it. It has to be completely open and free for anyone who needs it. Dr. Brooks, already excited, pulled out her phone. I know researchers at Johns Hopkins and Stanford who'd jump at the chance to help build this. We could have a working prototype in 6 months. Call them, Whitfield ordered. Whatever resources it needs, we provide it. No budget restrictions, no questions. 6 months later, the 3rd floor of Sterling Heights Medical Institute had been completely transformed. What used to be a storage space for discarded projects was now home to the Rare Disease Consult Center. Joseph, now 16, sat at a desk piled high with medical journals, case files, and three large monitors displaying real-time data from the national database they had built. He still wore his signature hoodie and still struggled with eye contact, occasionally overwhelmed by the buzz of hospital life. But he was also the chief diagnostic consultant, a position of real responsibility and influence. The door opened, and Dr. Sandra stepped inside, a young resident trailing her. "Joseph, we've got a tough one today," she said, her voice filled with purpose. A 28-year-old woman had been battling muscle weakness for the past 6 months, worsening after any physical activity. Her creatine kinase levels were normal, and the EMG tests hadn't provided any answers. Joseph glanced up from his screen, processing the details. Exercise intolerance, normal CK levels. What other symptoms? Dr. Brooks didn't miss a beat. Occasional double vision, drooping eyelids, especially by evening, and the symptoms improve after rest. Joseph immediately accessed the growing database, which now contained over 4,000 rare disease cases. Myasthenia gravis, but atypical. Run the acetylcholine receptor antibody test. If negative, check for MuSK antibodies. About 15% of MG patients are ACR negative but MuSK positive. Brooks smiled. The ACR test came back negative already. Then get the MuSK antibody test. Also order a chest CT to check for thymoma. Roughly 10% of MG cases have thymic tumors that need to be addressed. The resident, scribbling as fast as he could, looked up with genuine curiosity. "How do you know all this so fast?" Joseph, uncomfortable with the attention, shrugged. "I read a lot and remember what I read. That's it." Brooks gave the resident a proud glance. In just 6 months, Joseph has diagnosed 43 rare diseases that would have been missed under our typical methods. 43 patients who would have been lost. She turned back to Joseph with deep admiration. He's saved more lives in half a year than most doctors will in their entire careers. After the team left, Joseph turned back to his project. He was developing comprehensive training materials for medical students. Video lectures, animated flowcharts, case studies, everything he had learned on his own, now packaged for others so they wouldn't have to scavenge through discarded research like he had. A text from Christopher popped up. "Proud of you, son. See you at dinner tonight. Your favorite pizza." A small, genuine smile tugged at Joseph's lips. Things with his father were improving, though not perfect. Christopher didn't fully understand Joseph's autism and still sometimes pushed him to act in ways he wasn't comfortable with. But he was trying, and that effort, Joseph realized, was enough. 3 years later, the Sarah Turner Rare Disease Fund had financed 49 research projects. The Joseph Medical Scholarship had helped 89 students with learning differences, all of whom saw patterns where others didn't. The rare disease database Joseph helped build had assisted in diagnosing over 2,000 cases worldwide, saving lives across 6 continents. At 19, Joseph received the prestigious Lasker Prize for Medical Innovation, recognizing his transformative work in the field. He still wore hoodies to every formal event. He still struggled with eye contact. He still needed quiet spaces to recover from overwhelming situations. But his extraordinary ability to recognize what others missed made all the difference. Thanks to him, thousands of people who would have been ignored, forgotten, were alive. They were seen. They were remembered. They were valued. For Sarah Turner, who raised a brilliant mind while cleaning floors. For Christopher, who learned that being different wasn't broken. For every patient with a rare disease who had been told they didn't matter, too costly, too complicated, too rare to be saved, Joseph showed them they did matter. They were worth saving.